Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to start going over the neuroanatomical information that we're going to need to know. If we're going to talk about the underlying mechanisms for the mental disorders that we are covering this semester. And the first aspect of this is a very short, just a reminder if you already know these terms, and to make sure we're on the same page if you haven't used these particular concepts before. Directions, when we talk about mid-sagittal, when we talk about a horizontal cut. So this is a very short component within this information. And so let's just get started right away. I tried to put some pictures in here. Normally, if it was face-to-face, I would be doing demonstrations. I'll try to do that still here in terms of what we're talking about. But we need to know first how we describe the directions in the vertebrate nervous system, and it's all in relation to the orientation of the spinal cord. Why is that important? Because in some vertebrates who walk on all fours, you've got the spinal cord in a different orientation than you do in those primates specifically who walk upright. And so that's what we're using for reference. And the three axes that we're interested in are first, anterior, and posterior. This is one of the axes. Now, anterior, again, is toward the nose this way, or rostral. I have weird ways to remember things when I first learned them years and years ago. Rostral made me think of a rooster. When I think of a rooster, I think of all the stuff going on this area of his face. Posterior, on the other hand, is towards the back and towards the tail end, which is caudal. Caudal is the word for that. Then there's the dorsal and ventral. Dorsal is toward the back surface, if you think of a dorsal fin on a dolphin, or the top of the head. So this would be dorsal. Ventral is toward the chest surface. Think about ventilate, ventilation, breathing, and or the bottom of the head. So if I said ventral part of a brain, it would be this way, okay? Whereas if I said dorsal part of the brain, it would be going up towards the top of the head. And I will, make sure that I bring those terms back in when we're describing different aspects of the nervous system. For primates, very often, instead of hearing dorsal and ventral, or you will hear superior, which is the top of the head, and inferior, which is the bottom of the head. Okay, so keep those terms kind of straight in your mind. And the last axis that I'm going to talk about is the medial and lateral axis. Now, when we're talking about the medial axis here, we're talking about where a structure lies when it's going toward the midline of the body. Here's midline. And lateral is when the structure is farther away from the midline in relation to that basic axis. And so if I said, this is, if you have two things, and one is here and one is here, this structure here would be lateral compared to this one that's closer to the midline. Now, on these different little illustrations that I've tried to put in here for you, hopefully you'll see, here's that sagittal plane, sagittal, and the mid-sagittal. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment when we talk two slices, but when you're talking about the sagittal plane, you really are starting to talk about that moving in and out. Here are sagittal planes. You can use this to kind of describe the different things when we get into this next section. So these basically are part of moving into this, as well as looking at the overall body. Hopefully that helps. Don't worry if you get confused. I can always help clarify that for you. So let's talk about the 3 planes of sections of the brain. So when we're looking at brain structures, we need to know, is it like looking at it straight from the front? Is it looking at it from the top? Is it looking at it from the side? So let's talk about those planes of sections of the brain. The first I'm going to talk about is the horizontal section. And that would be the section across. Horizontal, that's pretty easy. So if you take a look at this particular illustration, what you've done is you've actually taken off the top of this individual's head. You cut across this way. And now it'd be like you're looking down at it. This is what you would see. Another plane of the brain anatomy that we'll be looking at is frontal or coronal. Coronal means face, corona, sun, and there's different ways we can go with the Latin and Greek underpinnings for that word, but frontal, think the front. And basically, this illustration shows you that it would be like you had somebody's head and face, and to look at the brain, you cut this part off and lifted it out, and this is what you would see. So it'd be like if I started taking slices back like this, okay? And the third plane is the sagittal plane, which I mentioned you can look at in terms of the entire body and one of those previous diagrams. And sagittal, here we go, is that going again, let's cut this in half and pull it to the side. And I could technically do a section over here or over here. I could just take a little slice and lift that off. But if I do it right smack down the midline, then it is called a mid-sagittal section. And so that would be if you just went right in the middle, you go down between your eyes, split your nose in half, split your mouth in half, and pull it apart, mid-sagittal. That does not mean, I just want to make sure you're okay with this, that if you move over, it's not a sagittal section. And this might seem simple, but when we're talking about a cross section, which we will at certain points, it's important to remember that that is a cross section. When we say that, it's a section that is cut at a right angle to any long, narrow structure. So imagine when we're talking about the central nervous system, what that structure would be. Spinal cord, okay? So this would be like if you took a spinal cord, it's long, right? Narrow structure, and you cut right across it. And you cut in different sections, and then you could take those sections out and look and see what's there. And that's what we have right here in this illustration. Again, this is just a very small part of starting out looking at the nervous system, but one that if you aren't comfortable with the terminology, you won't have as good of an idea of where in the brain we are talking about a structure. It's important to understand where the structures are within the brain. So